Welcome back, folks. Over the past few days I went back and replayed some old games I used to play growing up, one of those titles being Splinter Cell. And I do remember the hype for anything Tom Clancy related back then, from Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon, and ultimately like Splinter Cell itself. I still think I even have like those Rainbow Six games somewhere on a disc, which was honestly really good to actually see and experience again, so I redusted all of those CDs and I'm just playing one through one. But since I always liked stealth games, especially espionage stealth games, Splinter Cell always stood out for me. And who doesn't like the iconic sound of night vision when Sam puts them on? The story takes us to Georgia, as we take the role of Sam Fisher, the ex-Navy SEAL and CIA agent, who gets involved again with a newly formed Third Echelon, NSA's most secret branch that uses highly trained operatives to counter any threats against the US. You see, Georgia within this story is a very relevant place because, well, after the coup, new president takes over the country, Combine Nikolaje, which gets linked to two CIA agent disappearing, so Sam has to go and investigate. That's ultimately where the plot expands, as we get a classic sort of Cold War story, being that, well, those events were still somewhat fresh back in the day, and, well, it's used as the golden age of espionage, betrayals, nukes, war, and so on. As you play through the story, Sam learns new information about the mall within the US government, information from CIA being stolen, and a grand plan from these guys to cause chaos and shut down American infrastructure and fire some nukes. Well, little did they know that this is a Tom Clancy story, so there is someone to stop them. I mean, they should have read the title. In any case, game takes us to Myanmar, Caspian Sea, even the CIA HQ itself, as we try to solve the case, and because, well, this is primarily a stealth title, where you use the gun as the last resort, keeping a low profile is the key, because fighting the entire army, especially with limited ammo and weapons you have, is not recommended. This dynamic of being in the shadows, assessing threats and utilizing various techniques like interrogation to learn new info was just so refreshing that after I finished the first game back then, I was just looking out for more. Luckily there was, as Pandora Tomorrow, Chaos Theory and Double Agent were out already, so I was eating good. Because keep in mind, I got into Splinter Cell a bit later growing up, because the first titles of that sort of nature I played was Metal Gear back in the day, and after that, well, Siphon Filter, which is not fully like a stealth game, more it's an action game, but still, that trio of Snake, Logan and Sam was great for me. Now, this is a 2002 game, and I was really surprised to see them use dynamic light and shadows, which were not just there to make the game look pretty, but rather give you the sense of presence if someone is near, if someone is approaching, if you cast any shadows, even, passing through those clots was cool, as this is the first time I saw material moving that way, which was groundbreaking. Enemies are also very quick to react to you, so keeping the stealth meter at 1 and being in the shadows was recommended. Of course, because this is an old game after all, there were some problems with how NPCs generally react. One time they are blind and the other they see me even if I show myself for just a second. But their reactions, the way they aggro and then de-aggro were really cool, and you had to adapt fairly quickly by also using gadgets within your inventory, different grenades, like for example cameras by the doors and so on. To confuse them, you can also drop cans near them so you can sneak by. Even paying attention to what's on the ground, as walking over glass for example, can make NPCs hear you. Very detailed on that front and very much ahead of its time when it was released. The focus of the game wasn't on huge explosions and just guns blazing around, but rather silence and deception. There weren't any big theatrics, but rather a grounded experience with serious political narrative tones that serve the purpose really, really well. Now, the story is not too long, I believe it's like 10 to 12 hours overall, which is expected from a game of this era, but I noticed that it didn't really overstay its welcome. Being straightforward sometimes is good, as it doesn't fluff up the game with unnecessary features, but rather those that work specifically for the game formula. Being that this is their first Splinter Cell title, levels were a lot more linear than in, let's say, Chaos Theory. Like, very linear, but your freedom was not so limited, but still limited to working within that environment. Although, if you wanted to go through different ways, if you wanted a more stealth approach and not using your gun, there were ways to do it. Another huge thing for me was being able to drag someone so they can unlock the door using their biometrics, especially those officers, or going through computers, getting data from them, which can even unlock new information and sometimes give you codes for the doors which you need to pass through. There are some hidden rooms which you don't actually have to go into technically, but at least they offer some narrative details. I was also very surprised that by changing some INI files, I was able to get a much better image resolution and quality than I initially remember, so props to Unreal Engine 2 for still doing a good job. Although I did read that the engine itself was heavily modified by Ubisoft, so it can actually fit the game itself and give you those options for NPCs to react to light or noise in the first place and to serve the purpose of the game itself. Also because, well, this is a 2002 title, there are some things which are definitely outdated, like some controls, animations within them and so on. Like pulling out a weapon, moving around and just navigating through UI takes a second to get used to. I actually forgot that aiming down sights in this game is not too precise, and from time to time it was my main frustration, but you get used to it. Another thing would be the AI, because sometimes it reacts to things I knew I did right, even when NPCs are too far apart. But sometimes they don't do anything, so it can be a 50-50 experience based on like what do you do, within the game itself. But it's understandable as that specific coding was still well in its early form. But the main feeling of this title is this game of cat and mouse. What will AI do? What will I do to get past them? If I do this, will they see me and react? That tension of trying to be as professional as possible kept me playing, and a little anxiety on top of that raises the stakes higher, which immerses the player incredibly well. For me, alongside Kojima's Metal Gear, as I said, were those games that set the foundation for these types of titles, making NPC AI as smart as they could back then. Using environment to help you play was very refreshing. You also get to use the beams and railings to climb, vents to move around the map, going over the enemies in the way to reach your objective. That part was also very cool because it just offered different way of going through the mission and going through that level. It also cemented Sam Fisher as one of the most recognizable protagonists in gaming and the staple of Ubisoft back then, as improving and expanding on that formula offered a more grand experience later on. Especially as I said with Chaos Theory, which I will cover in another video, don't worry, just getting to it. But Splinter Cell 1 is still an absolute classic and I recommend playing it. If you got used to modern controls and UX, then you will need some time to adjust to it, but if you just want to understand where the franchise started and what it gave to the industry, well, give it a shot. There are also mods for it which enhance the game. For this playthrough I went vanilla, as I said, besides, better resolution. Playing this natively on 2K monitor is not the greatest, so I just had to change the resolution. Apparently Ubisoft also wants to remake this. I hope they do and they do it right, although remakes these days in general are hit or miss depending if a developer changes the game too much and it doesn't even represent what the original idea behind it was in the first place. So in the end, Splinter Cell 1 is a fun experience, both to play for the first time or revisit and remember the good old days of gaming, when games were more treated as games and less like a product. At the moment, it's also dirt cheap on Steam or GOG in case you want the full DRM-free version of the game. I do have an affiliate link to GOG as always in case you wanted to support the channel in an extra way. But you tell me down below, what do you think about Splinter Cell and how did you enjoy the game when you played it? This is also the start of revisiting series on the channel where I will go back and play some iconic games and even more some obscure ones from the past. It's also a lot of fun and I get to see how well they aged over time. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more and join our community on Twitter and Discord. Huge thanks to my current Patreon supporters and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye bye.